Good day, everyone. I'm Luca, Head of Offensive Security at Bentley Systems. This presentation wants to be a motivational talk for all those hackers out there that always wanted to share some cool hardware device with the community but didn't know how or hesitated to avoid any sort of financial risk. After this presentation, you will know more how challenging and painful it is to mass produce hacking devices, what to do if you have an idea and want to bring it to life, what to avoid in order to increase the chances of success, and a bit more about with Injector, with Delete, and the upcoming Potabox. Once upon a time, many engagements ago, back in 2010, I wanted to turn this weaponized mouse into a remotely controlled one. Sadly, I failed for many reasons. Lack of time for R&D, lack of a miniaturized RX module, not enough room inside the mouse, and eventually the idea ended up in my never-ending to-do list until in 2016 I've witnessed the presentation from Rogan and Dominic at DEF CON called Universal Serial Abuse. What is this? This is a marvelous piece of software that was exactly what I always wanted to see from the free open source community. An exact replica of the Cottonmouth functionality described in the NSA leak from 2013 by Edward Snowden. At this point, I had enough momentum to start working on my very initial idea. A piece of hardware now also compatible with US abuse that will also have features like mouse jacking, remote control, easy to weaponize USB gadgets, and that's how the very first idea with Injector, which means wireless HID injector, came to life. And I cannot thank enough Rogan for that presentation at DEF CON because it was like a mind opener. Now that we got an early stage idea of what we want, what's next? Well, in my case, I call it the napkin sketch. What is the napkin sketch? Well, it's a dirty, cheap approach that brings your initial idea to a more tangible point. It's the cheapest and fastest way to get a better feeling of what you have in mind. Usually, in this phase, I start adding the features I'd like to see in the final product, even though some of them will be dropped during the next phases due to technical reasons or lack of space, as it happens with Injector. So, in my case, I worked on two phases. The first phase was to release an initial product called with Injector, which then I enhanced by creating with Delete. Once we got a sketch of what we want to create, we need some validation, right? In order to easily validate an idea, do not start immediately with R&D and prototyping. I know that's hard. As an engineer, for me, it's way easier just to have an idea and start to create a prototype on it, based on it, and then eventually create a final working product. Well, sometimes happened in the past that that was sort of failure because I'm doing that in my spare time. So time is limited, and since time is limited, sometimes happens that you need to put a project half done on hold, and then eventually you will either forget about it or you will never be able to complete. So my idea is instead of jumping immediately after the idea from the idea to R&D and prototyping, you may waste a lot of time in something that may lead to a dead end. So prototype instead. Prototyping is a term that I've read for the first time in the book titled The Right It, written by Alberto Savoia. If you're planning to challenge yourself in creating something for the market, I strongly recommend to have a look at it because it's really, really interesting from many aspects, from many points of view. What is, in few words, a prototype? Well, it's a sort of physical, but in my case, cheap mockup of the product I want to create that allows to quickly gather feedbacks and validate my assumptions in a cheap and easy way. One example provided in the book is called Pinocchio, which was nothing but a can of beans, as you can see in the image, colored in black that had to resemble an IoT home assistant. Back in time, when Alberto envisioned this IoT device, there were not yet things like Alexa, Nest, and so on. So he just wanted to validate if that idea of an AOT home assistant was worth it. So Alberto practically envisioned what later would have become the well-known Amazon Alexa. In this way, he managed to easily validate that idea with just simple can of beans. It's an amazing approach. I strongly recommend you to have a read about the full story in the book because it will give you like the feeling of why prototyping is so powerful. Another example of prototyping is regarding the Palm Pilot. Jeff Hawkins designed one of the very first tablets in the history, the GridPad. It was an engineering marvel, but a market failure because it was still too big. We are talking about 90s, if I remember correctly. So determined to not make that mistake again, he decided to change approach. Instead of spending a lot of time in R&D prototyping, he took it simple. He took a wooden tablet, sticked on it a piece of paper resembling the UI of his ideal Palm Pilot UI, and then started to bring it everywhere for a couple of weeks. Every time he had to take a note, check emails, schedule a meeting, he was taking out this piece of wood and imagining that he really had in his hands a working version of it. Eventually, after days of usage, he managed to get enough data to end the prototyping phase. So he validated that the idea of having a Palm Pilot uh, was good enough to proceed further. So it was satisfied enough to continue with R&D. And as you can see here in the image, after the mock-up of the UI, that's the very first prototype board of the Palm Pilot, and of course the final product. In my case, I needed something a bit bigger than a classic USB flash drive because components that I used were commercially available and were not that small. I mean that's really small. So still, I needed something smaller than a Raspberry Pi Zero. As you can see here is some example of other offensive devices I created based on Raspberry Pi Zero that would have also an external antenna, since I was planning to add mouse jacking capabilities and radio hacking once. So looking around my lab, some option appeared, as you can see from the images. The goal here is to validate my idea and see if the plant size would fit my needs, right? Because during a pen test, you need still a quite unnoticeable, stealthy device, right? So eventually, I was satisfied of that and decided to proceed further. So those mock-ups, those prototypes, were enough to validate my idea. So what I was doing is, from time to time, I was imagining that one of those dongles were my USB with injector or with Elite, and I was plugging around colleagues in my office and see if they were noticing it behind their computer or laptop, and the data I gathered was enough to confirm that this may be a good idea. At this point, we reached a certain level of confidence that the product is doable, and I find it useful. But what about others? What about potential customers? Remember, if no customer is interested in it, it's very unlikely a manufacturer will invest time and money on it, right? Therefore, the next step was to get some market analysis in order to validate as well from that side this idea. So the fastest and the cheapest way I found, of course, I'm not a marketing guy, I'm not a business guy, I don't have an MBA, so I needed to find the cheapest and fastest way to validate the idea from a market perspective. So what I've done, it was a simple Twitter poll, which gave me enough inertia, momentum, to get to go on. So in that case, that simple question, simple poll, gathered like 93% of consensus among possible customers or users. So in that case, was enough to keep me going further. So after confirming that the product may be of interest for potential users, I had a couple of ways how to proceed. Jump straight on KiCad and start working on the schematics, or create a 3D concept. The engineer that using me and maybe you would have jumped straight through to KiCad and started to design the PCB and the schematics, right? Eventually, I opted for the latter because I love sketching, and I had finally the excuse to learn how to use SketchUp. So um, the pro of starting with this approach is less eager of time than designing from scratch a schematic PCB, since it doesn't require yet digging into datasheets, electrical and radio specs, or other constraints, but goes directly to the point of having a 3D model of your product at your disposal. Why it's so useful? Well, besides being a good way to brainstorm and detect eventual pitfalls or constraint missed during the napkin sketch, it also allows you to use such 3D model as an early visual representation of your idea for potential meetings with customers or, manufacturers or investors. So, and here comes the most challenging part from a technical point of view, the prototyping phase. In this phase, you will be designing, coding, banging your hand on the table when you're stuck, debugging, redesigning, almost giving up, and eventually getting something working out of all these process. So here the costs depends on what you're planning to design. In my case, costs were quite reasonable, so less than €100 approx to get the first, assembled prototype, and the time needed was around 15 days. You need to count 15 days as not person days, but let's say in a month or more, because I was not doing that as, daily job, just spare time. So I would say in 1 month and a half, probably I achieved a full working prototype with related proof of concept. As you can see here, I added a proof of concept video with Elite just to show you how it looked like. It was very rough, but it was working fully. So with a working prototype at your hand and some market analysis, we are ready to start hunting for manufacturers, right? And this is the most critical part of the whole journey, I would say, from a non-technical point of view. And this is the most critical part that will define the success of the project if you want to bring it to life to, mass production. First of all, why I opted for this business deal? Because as you know, the sales of with injector, with Elite, and the upcoming Potabox are all based on no profit. So I'm not getting any profit from out of the sales that manufacturer makes. So the reason is simple. I already have a job in the infosec industry, so I was not looking for yet another duty or job or tasks to stress me out. I just was looking for something challenging to do in my spare time that would involve hardware hacking. And most importantly, I wanted to give back something to the community without profiting it, right? Like, all these researchers that release softwares. I wanted to release something I love to make. Personally, I love more to make hardware. So I wanted to release a hardware that is still easily available, and, I release it for free. So creating the perfect initial email takes time and good amount of revisions. Look at it as a sort of sales pitch. You have very few sentences and a couple of images to catch the interest of the manufacturer. Usually I add the 3D concept here at this point, and the market analysis survey results. You don't have to be much verbose for two reasons: to not annoy the reader and to not leak too many intellectual property details before an eventual NDA. Why I'm saying that? Well, there are plenty of copycats around, or people that want just to profit out of your idea, so better protect your intellectual property as much as you can. Even if you will release in open source, open hardware, or for free, it doesn't mean that you need to make easier the life of copycats, right? In my experience, I noticed that the best time to send the email is around Wednesday and Thursday. Why? Because from my experience, I noticed that Mondays, no one respond to you, or they will respond badly, or just ignore your email. So just trust me and have faith and try that. Wednesday and Thursday worked best, at least in my case. Provide also an alternative way for the initial call, because especially when you're dealing with Chinese manufacturers. Um, they may not have access to Microsoft Teams, Skype, or more Western type of communication mediums. Another important point is avoid mentioning the undeal, so the thing that you will do it for a profit, on the Kickstart email, because sometimes may happen that they will think you have either mental problems or is a sort of scam. So usually people tends to be suspicious when you tell them, look, I'm doing for free. They will say that doesn't make sense, even if you explain them, especially from a Chinese culture point of view. So, and most important, be persistent. Do not give up after the first manufacturer refusal. I mean, that's normal. I mean, that's how it works, the business. So, and don't hesitate to repeat twice the concepts to the audience, because if you see they are hesitating to take you seriously, that's normal as well. So just be persistent. So once you will manage to find a manufacturer believing in your project, you will probably start to work with him in developing the very first revision of your product. And with that, the very first bugs may appear. Example, during the design of the first revision of with Elite, I was so focused on getting everything fitting in the PCB that I forgot to expose the interrupt pins for conducting radio attacks and extend the USB pins in order to make the weaponizing process easier. So what I've done, I had to well, not fully redesign, but um, heavily modify the layout of the PCB in order to accommodate to fix those bugs. Once most of the bugs will be fixed, you will see that the product reached a certain level of amount of stability. It's time to involve beta testers. In this phase, you have to put particular attention on picking beta testers. Why? Well, because most of them will say and promise everything just to get a free cool device, but then they will disappear like tears in the rain. By that, I mean that many people would say, yeah, I want to be a beta tester. I'm a super hacker. I want to try it. Yeah, we'll give you feedbacks and so on and blah, blah, blah. But then some of them, they will just disappear without even saying thank you. So they will get the package, they will get the device, and then will follow your thorough documentation with videos, tutorials, and then they will never come back. So select wisely beta tester. Another hint is do not have high expectations anyway. People are busy. So here a suggestion is usually I divide the beta tester in two parts, two kind of people. The security experts that I know they are reliable, and students. Sometimes happens that a young student in computer science has higher motivation and of course more free time than professionals. And even if they are not as skilled as a professional or do not understand how fully how your device works, they can be very helpful. So that was very good results I didn't expect. Another hint is prepare easy to digest documentation. This is the key for success. It is also vital for both actually beta test and post-release phases that you will produce a properly documented set of information for your product. In average, users, skilled or not, have limited amount of time, right? So if you want your product to be successful, you have to provide at the same time an exhaustive and easy to digest documentation, eventually also supported with video tutorials. In this way, I mean, documentation must be dumb-proof in a way that everyone can get up and running in as faster as they can, and you can just ignore eventually tickets like I cannot use it, or those dumb tickets. I automatically close them because there is enough information to know how to modify the firmware, how to update the firmware, how to flash the device, how to get it run, how to troubleshoot. So proper documentation is a must to succeed on after in post release. And here a little bit of Zen time. So more features may lead to more bugs. This is a fact. I remember when I started designing with Elite, I wanted a certain amount of features, and while developing the PCB and the schematics, I started to think, maybe I can add also radio hacking capabilities. Maybe I can add also that and that. And then bugs started to appear. Here, an example. Um, I needed an interrupt pin for receiving ASK amplitude shifting key signals, right, to start conducting radio attacks. So at that time, while looking at the schematics of Arduino at Mega32U4, I figured out that there is D7, so interrupt pin 6, available that is never used during in other Arduino boards. I didn't care about that. I just thought, is there? Why not using it? Well, I got a new PCB revision, and apparently it is the most painful interrupt pin of all of the Atmega MCU. So just to keep the story short, what I had to do was to, after debugging, figuring out why, I had to re-engineer, so redesign again the PCB. So just be careful of how many features you want. If there are not the main features, but you want still in your product, just study it better during the feasibility part rather than the implementation or design phase. Eventually, long story short, after the feedbacks gathered from the beta tester and the bugs fixed, the product was released to the market by the manufacturer. And then everyone was able to enjoy the final version of it in post-release. Just some numbers to give you an idea of the entity of these products that were sold in with this unbusiness deal. So before this presentation, I asked the manufacturer to give me some numbers after 2-ish years of with injector sales. So the number of the units sold by the manufacturer until now are around 10 plus thousand pieces for with injector and 1,000 plus 1,100 plus pieces for units for with Elite that was released last year. So that this gives you an idea of the achievement, the results achieved. But please don't tell my wife about that, otherwise we'll think that my no profit deal will with the manufacturer was not a very wise decision. Are there similar success stories? Was my journey the only one successful? Nope. At least a couple of people I helped followed my own business approach, and hopefully more will come in the future. As you can see here are some devices, hardware hacking devices that were developed um, following and released by following the Undeal process. So that's pretty astonishing as well. I'm pretty, glad that I'm not the only one thinking that it's possible to achieve that. So just to recap a bit, what are the lessons learned? Well, validating the idea is a prerogative. Do it yourself. Market analysis and prototyping are a must for succeeding in this case, at least from my point of view. Don't give up at the first manufacturer refusal. It's normal. Some of them will not understand. Some of them will not have time. Just never write them on Monday an email. They will just somehow, it happened that always got ignored. Documentation is vital, and pick wisely beta tester. That's very good tip. Listen to your user as well, because I got plenty of improvement derived from this point. Prioritize action items. I usually follow the divide et impera approach, so dividing a main goal in a subset of them, and then again and again iterating until I manage to complete in a fashionable time a certain small task in a way that I can easily escalate and reach my goal in a faster way. And finally, beware of some human beings. Copycats and intellectual property thieves are always behind the corner. So suggestion, NDAs, and OPSEC are your friends. Finally, I just wanted to show you what I'm working on right now. It's called PataBox. It's a multi-purpose single-board computer designed to fulfill offensive security needs and much more. So if interested of its development, be sure to follow PataBox on Twitter. And I really hope, sadly, time is over. So I really hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'm looking forward for eventual questions during the live session. Bye.